Okay,
Okay, we're on, everybody. Good evening. It is February 12th, 2015. I will start with our vision statement, as always. The Ashland Public Schools is committed to being at the forefront of student achievement by preparing students to be college and career ready while promoting independence, respect, and critical thinking skills necessary to succeed as problem solvers in the 21st century. This meeting is being recorded by WACA Cable TV. We'll start with the opportunity for the public to be heard. Then I think we don't have any recognition this evening. We also don't have a student presentation this evening. We'll review minutes of the 1/31/15 tri-board meeting. We will have our student representative update and any updates from the superintendent, assistant superintendent, or director of curriculum. We will have gifts and donations, and our special topics this evening are an update on the FY16 budget, a discussion and vote on some policy review, and an update on school start time, committee survey results, action items and future agenda items, school committee member updates, and then we will adjourn. So we will start the evening with the opportunity for the public to be heard. Anybody? Okay, seeing none right now. We will move on to review of minutes. Anybody have anything on those January 31st, 2015 regular session tri-board meeting minutes?
I didn't have anything.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't either. So do we have a motion to accept those minutes? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Moving on, it's already your turn, Lee.
That was quick.
Student representative update. You might get out of here early tonight.
8:30 league.
Yeah.
So, a little bit's happening. Not too much, but a little bit. The NHS talent show, the date was, I believe it was earlier in March, but they recalled it, and it's now March 20th. The auditions for that are still to be announced. The Ashland High School, the chorus and band, we are planning to take the officers, the 3 leading officers, which includes myself, down to the middle school to introduce the younger kids into the into chorus classes and tell them about what we do and how it's a little bit more serious than it is in Mendez School, and trying to recruit more people coming up into band and chorus. I know for senior week at the end of the year, we have a Red Sox game planned, Six Flags, and Class Day. I don't think they have anything else yet. I could be wrong. They always have the cotillion, but I believe there's one more thing they're trying to book. I know I heard Mr. Adams talking about it a minute ago. Clocker Idol is on tonight. I was trying to think of all 7 names, but I could not come up with a list. The yearbook for seniors, they've been checking our biographies and quotes and all of our pictures to make sure everything's finalized. So that's just a scary thought for me. Things are coming up. As I've said many times before, Guys and Dolls is in 2 weeks, February 27th and 28th. The tickets are still being sold online for $12.50 at hsts.com for another week and a half. They'll be gone on Wednesday night, I believe. And also, the last thing is, I know that the day after, 2 days after the show, on the Tuesday, March 3rd, will be the seniors hypnotist show. And that's usually very, very funny. So I recommend that. And I will be in it. So. That is all.
You about all these school days you're missing as a senior, huh?
I think the only reason why I could say I'm sad is not having the musical rehearsal.
Right, that's
So it's been,
important.
it's been eating at us a little bit.
Yeah.
But we're picking it up, and we've added some rehearsals, so.
Yeah,
I'm sure you'll be ready.
thank you. Okay, superintendent update, assistant superintendent, who's going first?
Go ahead, Ms. Duran.
I just have some gifts and donations that need to be accepted.
Okay.
The Ashland Lions Club has donated $250 to the Pitaway School as part of their Touch a Truck fundraiser. The Planet Aid, the donation bin for this quarter, the last quarter of 2014, is $522.55. I don't know what that means. And then, of course, we have a number of donors choose, again. Kristen Gazzard at Mendez, $749 for 3 Chromebooks. It took 10 donors 4 days to raise that money. Roberta Gerstein at Warren, an LCD projector, iPad, and Apple TV for a value of $1,893. It took 20 donors, 18 days. Teresa McCarrick at Warren, circus supplies for fitness class, $651. It took 11 days and 8 donors. And then the Ashland Cultural Council has given 2 donations, one to Rebecca Mukuchi at Warren for $210 for art books collection for their library. And to Rebecca again, $165 for art room, loom, and weaving supplies and books for $165.
Okay, good.
Yeah, sounds good.
We have a motion to accept the gift and donation.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Adams?
Just from my standpoint, just thinking about snow days. Spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks just trying to figure out the best approach. And I want to publicly say thank you to Department of Public Works, Ashland Police Department, Fire Department, Mr. Schiavi. We've been in constant contact with one another.
The National Guard today.
National Guard.
Yeah.
It's just been constant in terms of the communication. No determination of missing school is done without really collaborating with all of the departments in town. So I thank them and thank the families for being so patient with us. It's 5 days out so far, which is in a 3-week period. So that makes it very challenging. And then just working on the budget, and that's pretty much the extent of what's been going on.
Mr. Lynn?
Just 2 things. One, we had our February 4th half-in-service day. Got it in between the snow days, I guess. And I know it was difficult because kids haven't had regular instruction, but our elementary staff had Sarah Ward, executive function presentation, which again went over very well. If you remember last May, she came, Ms. Ward came and spoke to our secondary folks. And this went over just as well. She's a dynamic speaker. She's, nationally known in this area, and our teachers got a lot out of it. And then our middle and high school folks continued their work developing our curriculum maps, filling in all those pieces that are around unit development, and their work has been unbelievably great, and I'd love to share it with you all at some point. Not only the AMS and AHS teachers, but also the work of our art, PE, health, music folks, K to 12. The curriculum is really growing, and you can start to see sort of this written, articulated K through 12 continuum of what we teach, when we teach it, how we teach it, across the school year. So it's been really exciting. And then the second thing is we've run a couple of park practice tests for kids. I know that was a concern when we talked last about park, which seems like ages ago, but getting kids some experience using the various devices they may use during park testing, and it went over very well. That was actually at the middle school today, and I think at Mendez today as well. So kids got some experience, and we did too, just in terms of setting up and managing and doing something in a new way. So it was really successful. That's it.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, so when you have someone like Sarah Ward come in, what do you do following that to sort of, anytime you hear a good speaker, it's always great, but then if you don't have something to follow up, you might lose it.
So what I've done is a couple of things. One is Sarah Ward is a speech and language pathologist by trade. That's sort of the background of a lot of executive function issues. So for some of our staff our secondary staff in previous PD days, our speech and language staff actually took her presentation and then broke it down and expanded it and provided training, further training. The other piece is to try to engage staff in some of the suggestions that she makes. So what I've done is I tried to set it up so staff can try out, take for a test ride some of these strategies or interventions. It's a simple sort of form. I ask them to pick something, identify it, run it for a number of weeks, or whatever the strategy, however, so say
Right.
it's like a behavioral intervention, try it out for 4 weeks, take some data on it, share that with me, and I'll give PDPs to extend that, because the way PDPs work for teachers is 2 for attending Sarah Ward, 2-hour presentation. Doesn't really do anything for relicensure or anything like that, but when you want to relicense or things like that, you have to chunk them in groups of 10. So I will offer 8 additional PDPs to go through a process like that, where they're thinking of a strategy, implementing it, taking data on it, and then doing a write-up for me. So they end up with 10 PDPs in executive function. And there are some new licensure rules around, like special education and ELL. So for a lot of our teachers that will need to relicense, they get 2 for attending a session on executive function, and then 8 more for follow-up on executive function. They've reached the 10 minimum that they need. So that's the other way, is you really try to
That's good, I'm glad to hear it.
engage people
I
in
wasn't sure what the
trying
answer
things out.
would be. That was a great answer, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Okay, we're moving on to our special topics, and number 1 is the update on the FY16 budget, and Mr. Adams?
I think I'm going to stand at the podium because I have a couple
Yeah.
slides that are difficult to read, and I have to switch some of the landscape, rotate the full
Yeah.
file.
That makes sense.
Just a little bit easier. Probably going to be very difficult for you all to read, but
Did someone bang, does the door got shut?
hopefully you have it. So I just want to start with backtracking and going all the way to the beginning of our process, because I think we're still, for the families at home and the few that are here, we're still in the throes of the process of developing a budget, which will hopefully culminate on March 12th with a final vote by the school committee of our bottom line budget. Originally, it was supposed to be this evening, but after having discussions at our last meeting, our tri-board meeting, we came away knowing we had some more work to do, which was fine. But just knowing where we started to where we are today, I think is critical. So our process, when I presented my recommended superintendent's budget a few weeks back, started with a zero-based budget approach. So looking at line item by line item and making sure that we really analyzed everything that we were putting forth in the budget. And then after we did that, that's how I came up with the original budget request of the $28 million and change, $24,000 and change. And that clearly ended up being about a 10.1% increase over the prior year's voted on budget. So then through the process, obviously having conversations at the tri-board meeting, for those at home, it's Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, as well as the school committee, town manager, assistant town manager, myself, and assistant superintendent Corinne, met to talk about the process that we've all have gone through at that point in time. So at that point, what was shared with us in terms of the expected revenue that was coming into the town based on the 2.5% increase in taxes, the levy, and local receipts, and potential savings for a variety of things, utilities or whatever it might be. It ends up being, for the town and for the school side, about a 70-30 split, with about $636,700 coming towards the school side. I think it's really critical for those at home to understand Ashland is not a town rich in revenue generating sources. It's primarily a residential tax base community, and that's where our revenue comes from. So in any one given year, it's not a significant amount there are not a significant amount of funds that can support school budgets as well as general government budgets. That's just the community we live in at this point in time. So I think that's really a fair place to start. So after leaving that meeting then, it was decided that how do we go through the process of looking at currently, and I want to stress that currently, the amount of revenue that has been allocated towards the schools, because that number could change, right? I mean, as we're looking at, and the town side, general government's looking at their expenses as well as getting closer with revenue numbers. The new governor doesn't have to have his even proposed budget out until March. All of those things will eventually factor into finalizing what that number is. So we, as a administrative team and with the school committee, had to go through a process of saying, what would this look like? Should we have to make adjustments to the recommended budget? And again, I do want to stress that that's truly a needs budget. That's what we need to adequately just keep Ashland Public Schools at a level that we expect as a community. That being said, we have to look at the big picture as well. This is what we have currently allotted to us from a revenue standpoint. So unfortunately, I had to charge my directors and my principals, and I have a couple of them here, if you all want to ask questions of them, with the unenviable task of looking at where else we can reduce our mainly programs, to be honest with you, and some other smaller line items to meet the need based on our current revenue source. So unfortunately, as you look at this at home on the screen, if it's there, Miles, I don't know if you got it back there, but you're going to notice it's going across. I want to actually start on the farthest side of the screen, on the right side, because that really represents the entire $1.9 million that we would have to cut out of the proposed budget that I proposed that would balance out the expected revenue at this time. Okay, and again, I want to emphasize that. It's at the moment we're in today. This is a fluid process. It's ongoing. And as I share it with the community, and I've shared it with staff, I always want to stress that. It's still a process. So if you look at that, cutting out $1.9 million out of the recommended budget, this would look like, for instance, I want to focus on the bottom half about staffing. Because again, we are heavily, 80% of our expenses are salary line items, and that's personnel. And we know personnel is really the most critical piece to the education of our kids to begin with. So out of the proposed, we would end up having to cut about 26.6 full-time employees. That includes 18.7 classroom teachers, and as well as 5.4 full-time equivalent staff that we were proposing to add into that initial budget. And then online, and for the community, I did email it out so people understand it, you'd have to go back to the budget and look that at 1.9 million, the various, be patient with me here because I have to rotate the screens again. So on this chart here, I'm just going to go to the 1.9, because that would be the largest cut. That would get it to a situation where the current apportioned revenue is all that will be allotted to the schools. So this is what it would certainly look like. That there would be, at the Warren School, for instance, the wellness teacher, the 0.4 wellness teacher, a supervisory aide, the 0.5 librarian, one teacher at each grade level. So that means kindergarten, first, and second would all have one less teacher. And what that does is, going back to the first page, which I'm not going to do for the sake of this, is it would increase class sizes for grade 2, currently, it'd move class sizes up to 26 a class. As you know, at Warren, to begin with, the space is limited. And just adding that number of students into a classroom would not really be appropriate. So it goes all the way through looking at the potential cuts. So at the high school, changing, middle school, losing 2 world language teachers, a drama teacher. Look at, again, some of the principals are here, Mr. DiGirolamo here, thinking about the makeup of a middle school, a team approach to it, right? You have to have that history teacher, the English teacher, the math teacher, the science teacher. So the only other place you can really look at making adjustments to personnel are those elective type classes. And if you have questions for Mr. DiGirolamo, he can better explain how that's really actually going to impact his entire schedule. And he'll really have to challenge him with trying to figure out how that would work. Then you move into places like the high school, losing a unified arts teacher, an English teacher, a French teacher. So those are things, that's that worst case scenario, right? I mean, that's how I view it. That's if nothing else changes across the board. And then we work our way down from there. So what if, and I'm not going to go through every scenario because we'll have those posted online if folks want to look at those and then send us comments, send them through the chair, please. And then what we'll do is respond to people as those come in. So you can look at the I'm just going to skip instead of going to each one. So 1.3 million in reductions versus a 1.9 million in reductions. And what does that look like? So a 1.3 in reductions would mean instead of a 1.93 million cut out of the recommended budget, you're looking more at a total of 1.295, or we would have to increase the allotted piece that's currently given to us by $634,000 to manage this piece of the potential cuts. And again, what that does though is, and that would be about a 5%, a 4.99% total increase from the prior year. And what that does is, it still reduces teaching staff in district, who are currently in district, by 8 teachers, 2.5 other personnel, and that means, for instance, at the high school, we have 2 deans. Well, we would cut a dean position and actually go to a model that we know fails. I was part of the model, I'll let you know, where the athletic director and the dean were one and the same. And I can tell you because I was in that role. It doesn't work. But for the sake of looking at, from my standpoint, what is the most important piece, it's the teachers. It's having teachers in the classroom. But it will impact climate and culture of a school that, for me, I know we've worked really hard at changing. So as we go through that process, the cuts, even at this level of 8 teachers, will have a dramatic impact. It still includes 2 world language teachers at the middle school. It still includes an art teacher at the high school. And it does restore at that point, or place back in, restore is not the right word, but place back in elementary teachers to get those class sizes back down to where they should be in an acceptable level in the 21 to 23 range versus 26. And then we go through that process all the way down to just a $500,000 reduction, which would mean we'd have to add another $1.4 million based to the allotment that currently exists within the town. So I think one could argue that you've got 2 ends of the opposite ends of the spectrum. They're extremes, right? And I think what's really critical is you have to start definitely at the high end, because that's where we know we are today. But I do want to stress that over the course of many years, and I know it plays out, that number changes. It'll continue to move. But what that means is, I don't know at this time. So we want to be prepared to look at all possible scenarios. And what I would stress as well is these are scenarios, right? So on March 12th, when you vote on your bottom line, I would say that the impact that the community has and the discussions that the community sends our way will be critical to how we actually finally present the scenario. Because I've already heard feedback, and again, if you have questions for the two principals that are here, with regard to how two world language teachers would truly impact the schedule. And what does that look like? So once the bottom line number is finally reached, we'll have to go back to that drawing board and look at the scenarios. But this was a very challenging task. We spent 4 hours on a Thursday as just an administrative team. There's not one person that wants to do this. And then we spent 3 hours Tuesday as an administrative team and the school committee having these discussions. And there were changes that existed from what we recommended and what the school committee. So again, I can't reiterate enough, it's an ongoing process. We're going to continue to look at this. And by getting input from the community, and I know I already have, that will help us finalize what this budget should look like. And hopefully it will help you finalize what ultimately you vote on. So that's where we are today. It hasn't been a good couple fun days in Mudville, going through the schools, because I believe that having these conversations ahead of time with staff is critical. They want to know they're trusted, they want to know they're being heard, and they want to have faith that it's a process. And I think I've experienced when I was even in teaching that in May, someone finally presented a budget to me and said, oh, by the way, you don't have a job. As opposed to saying, and I was riffed 5 times, 5 straight years, never knowing until the day they had to tell me. And that's not fair to people. What's fair is to have a process and to not be alarmist, but to say, here's where we are today, here's are the scenarios that might exist, they might not exist. There could be a number in here that we haven't really planned for yet, right? But it's just the process of it. And so it allows the community to look at where we're headed with this process. And so that's really it. I don't know if you have questions for me, but I do have a couple principals here if you want to ask direct questions about how some of the things they had to put up. Again, this goes across the spectrum. This is every building is being impacted. This includes athletics. So it includes the curriculum. It includes us looking at personnel in central administration. So it's pretty comprehensive. So it should not be taken lightly just to review it.
I have a question for you, Jim, before
Sure.
I open it up
Yeah.
to questions from the committee or anybody who might have come to comment tonight. I'm getting a lot of emails already, and one of the things a couple things, people are really appreciative of your level of communication, that everybody's starting off with that, so thank you. But a lot of questions sort of take the flavor of why are you cutting this and you're not cutting that? And then they'll kind of give their explanation of why they think, choice B is better than choice A. I don't know if the rest of you are getting those sorts of inquiries, but can you just take a minute to explain the process of, some of the principles behind how we get to why we're cutting this instead of cutting that, for the benefit of the community?
Right. Well, in the end, it's about teaching, right? In the end, it's about how can we least impact the education of our kids. And again, I do have to go back and stress, unfortunately, 80% of our budget is personnel. And so if we're looking at cuts, that's where it has to occur. But the charge to the administrators and the directors was to look at, if you have to make a cut, how will it have the least amount of impact on the entire population within your building or within the district? So that's critical. That's the first thing, is make sure you don't want to propose anything. There's not one of them that wants to propose anything. But if you do, how's it going to impact all of the students? We know, again, impact a grade 2 teacher, that class sizes are going up to 26. It's unacceptable from an educational standpoint. We know that. But it would be, that's why the process has to unfold to determine, okay, is that second grade teacher in the whole scheme of the district, I don't want to use the word more valuable, the term, but has lesser of an impact than, say, a French teacher. We have to make that decision eventually. And as you go through, that's why the scenarios are really important, right? Is that you have that first scenario, but the second scenario, if you look at it, it reinstates what we view as really critical, which are smaller classroom sizes for elementary-based kids. Research shows they need to have the smaller class size, it's more effective, and their achievement level will increase. So that's really the premise of how we approached it, was how are we going to least impact the students?
Are there any questions from anybody in the audience for the school committee or the administrators?
I was just curious, I understand how you're talking about at the elementary level of the impact, but for instance, in the high school, if you were to cut, in the worst case scenario, a teacher and it was a specific course, would that program be gone?
Yes,
Okay.
potentially. Yeah, and I only say that, Lee, there's always, you have to look at what you have and then determine what you can then teach, right? So every year, at the high school, for instance, you're always analyzing. This year we didn't run AP Stats. Why? Well, we didn't have enough kids to run that course. And so you have, every year you're analyzing what courses are requested and what are needed. So if you cut chorus, how many students are involved in chorus, or how many students are involved in band? It's going to clearly impact the program, right? And it not only impacts that program, it might impact what you're doing in 2 weeks, right? It's going to impact the play and the musical, because not enough kids are involved in that.
And also, lastly, oh gosh, I'm forgetting. I'll come back to it. I forget.
Who wants to start? Anybody have questions?
I can sit, and then if you do want to have other questions.
Well, Jim, I guess just briefly from your perspective,
Yeah.
because you said you were part of a model that failed as far as the dean
Yeah.
being combined with the athletic director. And I know that's not in the classroom per se, but we talk about culture and climate and how important it is to keep in touch with all the kids and mental health. I mean, can you just tell us a little bit about why that didn't work and how important it is
Sure.
to have deans, and were we striving for something else? Was it at one point were we striving to have a dean for each class?
We did. We tried that, right? That was part of the original model back in 2009. There were 4 deans, half-time deans. And at that point, I was the dean and athletic director. And then there was a dean and a teacher, and a dean and a school psychologist, and a dean and another teacher. And we just found that if you want to create, again, the research shows that you create a smaller school, right? In the end, that's what we're doing by having 2 deans. Each dean's responsible for about 360 kids. So having the opportunity to get to know those classes and follow them through is critical, and their families. So what we found was, if you're only dedicating a portion of your day to getting to know kids, to dealing with teachers, the new Ed-Eval system, by the way, takes tremendous amount of time. If you have 80+ staff members who need to be evaluated, 1 person or 2 people can't realistically do that and manage the rest of the school, discipline issues, and the other things that exist within a school setting. So it failed partly because we just didn't have the dedicated time to it. So I can tell you from the athletic director dean role, the athletic director role was probably the most time consuming of any job I've had within this district. And I think I put a lot of time into my other 2 roles that I've had. But that's a very different animal. And when you're looking at divvying up your day, and we have 23 sports, it just doesn't work. But again, I think as you're looking at it from a budgetary standpoint, what is the most critical, it goes back to the achievement, right? We have to make that decision, and so Ms. St. Clair had to make that call. But having a climate and a culture within a school where people feel comfortable, safe, and want to be there to teach will increase the achievement level as well. When you have schools that are in disarray and chaos, not only by students, but by faculty, you're not going to achieve the results that we've grown accustomed to achieving.
So you're saying they have an impact on the staff as well, not just on the
Without
parents?
question. The staff has to feel as though they're supported. When a child is being insubordinate and they're sent down to the office, and you've got, again, if you have one assistant principal, or one dean, and a principal who might be doing observations and evaluations, there's no one that can help with the child who's been sent out. And then that child ends up back in the class. And we have one teacher here, we were all teachers, people who were principals who were here. If you're not supported by administration, all of a sudden now it becomes a very caustic climate. And it goes downhill quickly, and it can change in a heartbeat. It took us 6 years to get to where we are. And I think we have we've developed, and if you're just speaking to the dean AD role, we've developed a great climate in that building. I think as evidenced by Boston.com saying we're 13th best climate high school in the state out of 350 high schools. Why is that? We've worked hard at it, and it could potentially go away quickly. It'll go away quicker than it did in terms of developing it, for sure.
Well, I thank you for that explanation, because, I'm just getting started in the high school, and I think we have a lot of families who aren't yet there, so they don't necessarily understand the roles that those people play, so appreciate that.
Sorry.
Oh,
The question that I was going to ask was, if you may have said it previously, but this is the first time I'm hearing of the budget fully. But when the vote is passed, when will it be implemented? Next year or as soon as possible?
No, so this is for FY16, so after the end of
Okay.
the school year.
After you
So
graduate.
It's next, after you graduate in 3 months, right? So that's the impact. We're looking for, the impact will be for the students who are still in the schools and those who will be entering at the kindergarten pre-K level.
Okay.
Right. Sort of like snow days that you're really worried about right now, right? So you have 2 more, and by state law, I actually have to move graduation. So don't change,
No.
That's the
for
first
snow
time I've
days.
ever heard that.
They'll change
yeah.
something else. You won't
Right,
graduate.
exactly.
So, I have something, it's more of a comment, but maybe you can amplify. For people, and I know we've talked about it at previous meetings, but, we talk about that need budget that went up 10%, and people who are sort of new to this might wonder, how does that change from one year to the next? And, I have in my notes that really there were 3 things that have fed into that. One is needing to meet mandates that come from the federal and the state government. So we have to do those things. So, second is rising enrollment, particularly that 2nd grade classroom. The town is growing. Everybody drive around town, it's growing. So we have that rising enrollment. And the third would be to meet our contractual obligations. And that's the one that people sometimes get stuck on. This is essentially what we pay. You've talked about it's 80% of what we do is what we pay our people. And for that one, I think we've spoken before about that, we negotiated the very best contract that we felt that we could, but people must be aware that we are in a labor market that, that we share with this whole region, and that Ashland is very competitive. So, and I know that we've covered this ground before, but I know people come and go in terms of what they see on these shows, and so I always think that bears repeating, because that 10%, people might be surprised by that, so.
Right. No, I think it is important to understand that the demographics of Ashland is changing.
Mhm.
And one might say, well, how come the mandated costs, you're so focused on that this year, whereas last year you didn't focus on those? And I think what's really critical is we took a real deep look at what we need to be doing to provide services to all of our kids. And that includes the students who are moving in who don't speak English. And we've seen just a rise in that population. We're over 100 ELL students now in our district. And that level alone, it's the pre-K, we're seeing the most needy by mandate, right? Those who have 0 English speaking skills, who are required to get an hour and a half daily instruction. Now that doesn't mean it's one-on-one instruction, it just means they're required to get that every single day. We're nowhere near close to making that mandate. So as we went through the process, we had to step back and say, this is critical, we get this squared away. You open yourself up for civil rights violations, you open yourself up for lawsuits, and that's not a good thing for not only the school, but personally, not good for me because I'm liable individually. It's not good for the town, right, overall. So, because school committee gets sued, it still ends up impacting the entire town budget.
And if that child doesn't get those services, they're
They're
just
never
going to
going to
continue to
get
have that need, and we're
That's
going to
right.
continue to have to keep.
So the early intervention pieces, I've spoken about it a lot because of my own child and having early intervention at the kindergarten level and the first grade level for speech and language and being on an IEP at that point. He's now off it. And those resources can go elsewhere. But if we didn't catch it early enough, which is what we're trying to do, then that's a cost that could be borne out all the way through someone's high school, all the way through high school, right? And then we have this phenomena that's occurring in every district around us with our out-of-district placements and increase of over $500,000 of unexpected costs. It's sort of, I was kidding a little bit with town manager on Tuesday when we met with him. I said, your snow removal is sort of like my out-of-district to a certain extent, right? That you just don't know. You put a piece in there, and you hope and pray that we don't have 71 inches in 13, in 3 weeks, right? Well, we did. And we can't, the notion of having kids move into our district who need significant services that we can't provide in-house, to a tune of over $500,000 next year. And unexpected this year, over $375,000. So we're talking about almost $900,000 in a 2-year period that those needs have to be met first and foremost. You have no choice in the matter. And that, certainly will then impact other parts of a budget. So you have to balance those two things out. But again, I contend that we're still here to educate every single child. And by reducing a program like Lee might mention, is impacting all of those children as well. So it's a funding issue, and we know that. Again, I don't want to sit here and say it's a town funding. It's not just a town funding issue. It's a state and federal funding issue, right? And that's the concern as well. The amount of reimbursements we get for circuit breaker has gone from, Barbara, 1 year was 25%, which is the lowest it's ever been. And that's the amount we get for reimbursement of out-of-district placement after 4 times the cost of up to 72% of last year. So it's very difficult to balance. We don't know what the governor will propose this year in terms of funding that. We already know that in his 9C cuts, he cut some of those reimbursements already, right? So those are the challenges. So having those conversations as a community, I can't express enough. You've got Karen Spilka, got Tom Santacandra on this community. Reach out to them. Have those conversations and find out about how to increase the funding and what people are going through. Holliston next door, they're seeing over $1 million increase in out-of-district next year. So it's a challenge, and we have to rise up and figure out, again, what we as a community value and work within the frameworks that we have. That's what we're trying to give all the different scenarios.
I would just say one more thing, which is that piece of information that we had from Mrs. Durand about how we started. I mean, we started this budget year, we do this every year. We don't start from a position where we have a lot of stuff that we built into the budget that are extras, so that, you know, in the good times, you can cut those out. I mean, we've been facing hard times for a long time, and when our net positions are down, am I right?
22.
We're down, I think it was 19 was the net down, or are we down?
A net decrease of 22.
There's a revision
Okay.
in front of you tonight.
Oh, that's a repeat, oh,
Thank you.
anyway, but, so that's another important thing for the community to know. If we had an abundance of people doing electives, for instance, we talked a lot about the high school, we lost the ability to provide electives to our kids that were available when my kids, who are, you know, are in their 20s now, when they went through high school, there were electives that are no longer around. And no one knows to miss them because they've been gone for so long.
Right. And again, it goes back to that, well, you've done well without it. And that's just not a mentality I like to look at. I want to be better than we were today. And that's my goal. Hopefully that's why I was hired, is to move our district forward, not to regress. But it's a challenging time. I mean, again, I think we do have to step back and be realistic about the potential funding sources that exist currently. And that's just really important. But to use the terminology, again, of the town manager, of it's an outcome-based budget. Well, my outcome base is how well my kids are doing when they graduate. And if they don't have the opportunity to be successful when they leave Ashland High School, or if they're leaving Ashland High School because they don't have the opportunity to be successful, then we're failing, and I'm failing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm the administrators that are here, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, I have a couple of questions. You mentioned, I guess I can start with you, Mike. And would you mind, just so people at home, because
Mr. Cairo.
you said about leaving this district, and I'm already getting those emails too, like, well, I'll just leave, kind of thing. And Jim talked a little bit about the impact of class sizes, for instance, 26 in a elementary level. Can you elaborate, like, what would be the impact of some of these potential scenarios in your building?
Sure. I think probably the biggest impact that we would see on increased class size are the amount of students that would need a higher level of intervention and supports. So I immediately think about our response to intervention, our RTI, that we've talked a lot about at these meetings, where we get together to come up with ideas to better support students. Well, if you have 26 students in a classroom with only one teacher, how can you effectively implement intervention strategies for individuals when the allotted time for those individuals has just been decreased by 4 students? So when you're typically with 21 or 22, you can have a few groups of 4. Well, let's just do the simple math, right? If you go from 21 to 26, now it's an extra group for your reading group, for your reading instruction. We do things called the Daily 5, where kids get together and they work on various strategies for literacy, and the teachers will meet with the small groups. Well, in a short in amount of time we have during the day, you can't possibly meet with every one of those groups if the group just grew by one full set of 4. You're not going to be able to get with those kids. There's just not enough time, so something else has to give. And just there's so much research out there too that I can't even begin to delve into regarding student achievement, and then to think about the fact that we're teaching students to read at kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade. That's the old adage that we teach students to read. They're learning to read at that level. When they get to 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they're reading to learn. That's the difference. So they can't read to learn in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade if they never learned to read in kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade. And they're going to have a higher chance of failure if the teachers aren't able to spend more time with an individual, or more time with a small group. whole class instruction is a thing of the past. I mean, obviously, we still have some of it. And it's obviously, group discussion is great at the level that we teach, but the majority of our instruction is done in small groups, centers-based instruction. That's how we work. You tour our building, you tour the kindergarten, you're going to see centers-based instruction, where kids are working on hands-on activities. The teachers are rotating the room constantly. Well, if there are too many groups for one person to hit, somebody is going to get lost. Somebody's going to ultimately fall in the cracks. So you've got to see it. You've got to see it to be in it, but I'm not sure if I'm explaining it the best we can, but if there's just not enough time in the day for every kid, somebody is going to be missed. And that really worries me, because that's not appropriate. You can't miss a kid. You can't fail one, let alone 4 in each class. So 4 students being missed in 8 classes, that's 32 children. That's a program right there. That's that's a class plus 1. So it's simple math, really. I mean, that's the best I can explain it.
So on the RTI that you mentioned earlier, is there a percentage of that group that ends up in special ed anyway?
Sure.
Like you attempt
Yep.
to address it with RTI,
Yeah.
and if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So if they don't get what they need in the RTI, is that increasing the chances that you'll have more kids going into the special ed?
Absolutely, absolutely. So if we're not getting the proper interventions and supports at that tier 1, tier 2 level in our tiered support system, you're going to see more students being assessed for special education needs. Well, what does that do? That is a time crunch now on staff that has just been reduced. So we'll have our school psychologists taking on even more time to assess in my reports. We'll have our OT, our speech and language pathologist, doing more assessment, more report writing, which means that they're going to miss service delivery for other students, because every time they have to assess, they get taken away from service delivery. And now you're talking about more kids that are needing the services. So every time a student needs services, it could potentially break away the time that another student needed. And the bigger groups get, again with that, the less likely we are to hit everybody's needs. And with the ELL, the same thing. I sat with the teacher that I consider to be one of the best teachers I've ever been around, period, today at my school. And we talked about the 3 new ELL students that moved into our district this week.
Really?
2 of which are non-English speaking.
This week.
This week. I placed them today. Okay? And so when we talk about 100,
102 now.
we've crossed the threshold,
Yep.
Mr. Adams.
You know?
Yeah.
And there's no funding, people, understand.
Right.
It's just a threshold to become a high incident district.
Become a
for-
high incident.
Right, that's all it is.
It's a label,
Right.
yeah.
And she said, how am I supposed to do this?
Right.
And I joked and said, well, we're not sending them back,
Right.
so let's figure it out. And she said, well, you need to look at my schedule with me. And we sat down and we said, well, we're gonna have to fit, we'll
Right.
have to fit them in here.
Spoke.
And the response was, yeah, this is where we're gonna have to fit them in. I hope I hope we're going to be able to give them enough.
Right.
I'm sorry, Mr.
No, I was gonna, and I misspoke and thinking about that. It's actually 2.5 hours of daily instruction. It's not 1.5.
Right.
That's the next level down.
That's what I thought.
So, but the NESs, which are a growing population, it's 2.5 hours of direct instruction.
And we're not doing that necessarily.
Or not at all.
And,
Well, it's true.
and we know it, and we just looked at each other and said, we need to give this little guy, who we placed today, as much as we possibly can, knowing that it's not going to be enough, but we've got to do it. And I'm telling you right now, we'll get more after February vacation. I'm sure that we'll probably have a couple kids move in during February vacation, because that's when parents register kids sometimes for a new school. It's growing.
Is it the same scenario with that group, like RTI? Like if you miss it at that critical point, that they could end up in the subgroup in the MCAS that doesn't succeed? And
absolutely.
they end up,
we are really proud of the fact that we FLEP kids, which means they become formerly language students, okay? I'm not sure exactly what FLEP stands for, because we use acronyms like crazy at our level, but we take kids off of ELL services at our level, and we're proud of that. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Because at the kindergarten, first and second grade level, we're so literacy-based anyways, that they're constantly getting that type of service, especially in kindergarten. So we can survive because we are always literacy-based and heavy language. But if we're getting overloaded with students with these needs, and we don't have the staff that we need to properly service them, we're not going to FLEP these kids. We're not going to get these kids off this plan, and that's going to make the numbers greater at Mendez, which is going to ultimately make the numbers greater at the middle school. And the best way to judge it for us is how many kids came in at kindergarten and left not needing those services anymore at third grade. And we do pretty well with that. But I fear that we won't.
Well, and I'm just thinking that child, when he finishes the 2.5 hours of instruction, if he gets it, he goes back into a classroom that may have 26 kids in it.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's sort
A
of those.
potential scenario.
Sure.
That compounding of an issue. Now we've got a kid in a classroom where,
Right.
talk about getting lost. So it is not a good, doesn't sound good.
Any other questions for Mr. Carroll? Or anything else you want to share with us?
Well, I just feel like there's one other thing I want to share that, because I had a conversation with a parent recently, and I feel like this may be a common misconception across the community, so I want to be able to hopefully clarify something. So when we talk about out-of-district
Your
placement,
5 minutes of fame, you know?
well, when we talk about out-of-district placement,
Yeah.
we're talking about students that have to go and get specialized instruction. And some people think that out-of-district placement means we're sending a kid to the Newton Public Schools. And that's not what that means. It's called out-of-district because they're leaving our district to go get specialized instruction somewhere else that we're not necessarily able to provide in Ashland. So it's not that they're getting the normal public school education in a different district. It's a specialized instruction that's at a school such as the Boston College Campus School, or a school that has a specific skill set for children, a disciplinary, for discipline or for specific needs that are very specialized to that student, that individual. And I think that's a common misconception by people, that it's just a student that could be in any regular ed classroom, and we're just sending them to somewhere else, and that's not true at all.
And I think
Right, it's not school
right.
choice.
It's very important because,
Yeah.
first of all, I mean, you're sending them because their needs are too severe,
Right.
or there's such a low incidence that we cannot provide. But we always start by trying to provide services. I mean, we're legally required. If we can do it here, we want to, it's best for the child. We always begin with that.
And I just
And
think
when
that
we
that
can
term
build-
out-of-district confuses
No, I
people.
think it's a really good
Yeah, it's a
point
good
to go
point.
through that. And when we can build a program, if we have the capability to keep these children in district, we do the best. Mr. Lynn can speak.
And just to amplify that, it's not just we decide to send them. There's
Right, good
there's a
point.
team process that consists of teachers and administrators and specialists and parents to talk about what that individual child needs through their individualized education plan, through their special education program. So I think it's a great point by Mr. Kyra.
All of that is spelled out by
Kyra.
law. This is not something that's
Yeah.
Ashland specific. Every town has to do this. The team process is all written in the law. I think that's a really important point. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Clarification. Thanks.
Mr. DiGirolamo, I have a couple questions for you. I'm sure others might as well.
questions too.
Thank you for being here, and I know it's been a busy and a rough couple of weeks for all of us. Jim talked about the schedule and the loss of the world language teachers. And help us understand better what that means.
Sure. At the middle school level, we have a team model. So each grade has 2 teams, where each team has core level teachers, English, social studies, science, and English, as well as have 2 periods where they're off team. Typically, when they're off team, they'll have a world language class, they're not getting support services, and they'll have a specialist wheel. They'll take band, or they'll take music, art, or drama. So when you're talking about making cuts, it's not as simple as saying, if we cut, not that we would want to, a core academic teacher like a science teacher, because we only have one of those teachers on each team, that team wouldn't have a teacher. So it's not as easy as saying, we'll cut that teacher and we'll spread numbers around and just make larger class sizes. The schedule doesn't facilitate, it just doesn't work, it doesn't facilitate that. Nor would I want to be honest, because right now our class sizes are around 23. They're already high when you look at those things. So
What's ideal at your level, middle school?
you'd like to see them at around 21. I mean, you'd like to see them lower than that, but 23 is, you don't want to be any higher, we don't want to be any higher than 23. So when I'm approached with cuts and we're having these conversations, we start to build, for me, that wasn't an option. So the only options I really have to look at the middle school level is departments like the specialist sort of departments, the world language department, or our specials. So, and Superintendent Adams mentioned that at the cuts level, at one level, I have one world language teacher. So if you cut one world language teacher from the middle school, it's going to dramatically impact the class sizes. Right now the class sizes are 17 plus. They're at a smaller level. We offer a world language to all levels. Grade 6 takes an exploratory of both French and Spanish, and they get to then choose, after experiencing both, what they're going to take in 7th and then 8th grade. So they have all three. If you cut one from that, you would be impacting those. So the first impact would be those class sizes. So you're going immediately from 17 to full classes. By full, I mean 25, 26, depending on how many students go into French and Spanish. It'll vary, but very full classrooms. The concerning part for me is now when you go to 2, because you have that limitation of the schedule, you have those 2 periods. You can't just cut and make class sizes any larger. So the only way to do that is to impact the program. It might mean taking away that exploratory so that students don't have that 6th grade opportunity, let's say. Or looking at impacting 7th and 8th grade, offering it instead of every day. Paring that down, offering it halftime, somewhere within your schedule. So, but the challenge there is when you take that out of the schedule. So I can make that work within the world language department, those cuts, which I don't, it's difficult because I don't want to do it. But also, the problem now is when you're scheduling, as a principal, what goes in that for those students? Yeah. What goes in that spot? We don't have any staff, there's no place for those students to go. So that's the challenge. So as I look at those 2 position cuts, you could be looking at changing the schedule and taking something out of the schedule, which would be a really significant impact. So if you took out one of your class periods, whether it be our discovery period or teachers are having meeting time, you're impacting every student in the building. Really, because you're not just impacting that one department, whether it's trying to find a way to disperse those students just to put them somewhere. The specials and making those class sizes in the 30s, and that might not even work. I've been talking to Superintendent Adams the last couple of days. I'm running the numbers because there's a lot of sort of puzzle pieces you have to move to get that exact number. It's not adding up to a point where you have to look at really changing the model, changing the schedule, and it would have a significant impact, as I said, without a doubt on all of the specials, but potentially the middle school schedule, which that team model I initially referred to, within that school day, our teachers have an opportunity to meet several times a week to discuss students, to discuss curriculum, to discuss students who are on ISSPs, to discuss students who are in our RTI, mentioning that as well, that of course goes across all grades. That's where students are getting supports, that's when students are getting additional strategies, interventions. That could all be impacted by that extra position. So again, I could make the world language work by, which you don't want to do, by really limiting how the program is delivered to students, and there would be a significant impact there, but there would be a ripple effect. And I'm looking at, there's no way around that ripple effect for that second position. It's a question of what that is going to look like, which, until I really start running some of those numbers, and I'll get those to Superintendent Adams, but it's not gonna be good.
So there are two things that I think are really critical to think about. One is, as I stated at the beginning, we're still in the process. So those who are listening to Mr. DiGirolamo, it's still a process. So until we decide that number, until you decide what that number looks like in terms of the bottom line budget, the impact and the input we're getting, you know, on further reflection is we really will have to go back and look at that, that second world language position, right? And see how it is now, as he's done more research in the past couple days on the schedule, how it's going to impact. The second point is, what he's talking about is actually would require us to open up negotiations again with
That's what I
with
was
the
thinking.
union. Because there are very specific things within each level in terms of the classroom, the structure of the schedule.
Right, and amount of classes that they teach per
Correct.
day. So if they end up with one of the specials.
So those are just ripple effects as well that
What
occur.
I'll add, and I'm looking at that contract and look at those requirements, and that's what's sort of maddening, right? Because it's not as easy as just saying we can do this. It's looking at those requirements and keeping that in mind when you're moving those puzzle pieces around. So it creates that additional challenge when you're trying to solve those problems. And if you look at the cuts as well, another part of the problem is that with the drama program potentially being cut, which is on that list, again, that's another teacher, that's another, if anything else, another place where if you're trying to deal with one cut, that you could place students someplace else to try to create that place, but now that place isn't there either. So it really is trying to figure out how you solve all of those problems. So it's pretty leveled, and I just to reiterate, it was difficult, and there's no easy answers. There really isn't in terms of what we're offering. There's just not the staff. There's not the staff to do it. So in addition to just the obvious impact of the programming, the class sizes, and the impact it would have on students. So.
Well, but we've talked about how, it's taken 6 years to change the climate at the high school. We've worked hard at the middle school too. Change the climate, so.
And we've set goals. We've looked at data. We've looking at MCAS data and students in that high needs area and where we want to, and identify those students on ISSPs and trying to get them to meet their individual state district learning goals. As I said, it's concerning for me because we're putting all these things in place to move forward.
Right.
And that's the concern for me, and these are the conversations I've had with Superintendent Adams. That's the, I don't want to
Move backwards
I
on
certainly
that.
don't want to
Right.
move backwards, and
Right.
and
Well,
that's
those
what's,
are
I think,
published.
weighing on all our minds and keeping us up. So,
Where are you at with time on learning? Because I know back before we had the sixth grade, before we added sixth grade language, we had kids, they essentially were doing a study, right? I mean, it was not a great use of their time. They're in school, and it was the same kind of thing you're describing.
yeah.
And I know you have requirements on time on learning. Are you close to?
Right, as it exists right now?
No, would this impact, I mean, is that part of it, or do we have plenty of minutes? I mean, am I right that you have a certain number of minutes?
If you were looking at a change of schedule, you'd have to alter, if, let's say you had less blocks in the day, and you have to extend those blocks, that's another piece you'd have to look at to make sure you matched up those minutes, and you were still meeting minutes.
So so you have a time on learning required by the state?
By the state.
DESE.
By the state, yes.
So that is it's just another piece of this
Right.
puzzle,
Correct.
that every child needs to get a certain number of
Right.
minutes of instruction.
And I'm going to digress just for a second because we do have people, when you're thinking about, when I get the emails about the 180 days of school, that's a great question. Yes, we're required by law to have 180 days of school, but there's time as well that's associated with 180 days. So 990 hours
Okay.
of time on learning needs to exist within those 180 days. So study halls, for instance, do not count. It's an actual instructional time of the 990.
But language does. World language does.
Correct.
But,
Yes,
but I'm
correct.
saying putting the
Right.
kids just in a
Not having
study
it.
because we don't
Correct.
have a
Could
teacher to
impact
teach
potential
them.
time of learning.
That's what
Right.
my
It
point
could.
is.
and
It's
that's
just
the-
another piece I understand when you're doing this puzzle.
Yes.
It's a great point to make, and that's something that I would love to, I'm actually, again, trying to go in the other direction and remove a study and get students in front of teachers, and any of those cuts would have middle school going in the opposite direction, which is not what I want, but you might be looking at that being an issue, depending on where the level falls, what that
Yeah, right.
scenario represents. So, but I'm still pouring into it and providing more information and looking at the several options, but that's what, at that level, that's what would need to happen. So,
And again, the reason you have teams is that smaller school piece, which we talked about earlier,
Correct.
right? So that, you know, the teacher knows the kids and the teachers know each other and they work together, it's.
very common middle school model, and
Yeah.
again, it does, our teachers are constantly talking about students and what we can do to improve, and we can look at curriculum, and it affords all those opportunities,
So
that
it's
was
really not,
impacted.
you can't go away from the team model at this
No.
point, right? Are there any middle schools that aren't using a team model anymore?
Other middle school, there are some that might go more of a junior high model, but most of the principals that I speak with and at the MSSA I interact with, the team model is the
It's
most
the
common
team model, yeah.
model. And again, we feel it works for us, and it would be, again, trying to still maintain that with all these other restrictions and impact of the cuts.
I'm just trying to anticipate what people are
Well,
thinking.
no, and
There might
again,
be
I
somebody
think-
out there saying,
well, I
well, then
think-
don't do that model.
Right. That model really exists in many, many districts through the 9th grade. So even go to Lincoln Sudbury, everyone's taking the similar,
Yeah,
you know,
we
structure.
don't want to go backwards.
No, but I'm just saying that that's the team model does exist all the way up through the 9th grade.
Right. I'm saying we don't want to go backwards to the junior high model, which is what the rest of us went to high school with back in the day. This has been discovered to be a more effective way to teach
Correct.
this age.
That's right.
And it is worth mentioning and bringing up that model, because again, it isn't as easy as saying, we just cut this teacher, we'll just raise numbers, which we know we don't want to do. There's just another level there that provides additional challenges.
Thanks, Dave.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Anybody, question
Thank
or
you.
comment before we move on to the next item on our agenda? Yes, please.
You-
Yes, thank you, just so the public can participate in what you're saying, hear what you're saying. Thank you.
I appreciate this is a tough effort. Could someone comment on the number of non-teaching staff that are proposed for cuts, and particularly with emphasis on guidance or psychological support?
We have, again, it depends on level. Right, can you just introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are? No, I know you are. but-
21.
So, in the scenario, if you're looking, and again, we'll have it posted tomorrow online, as we're looking at the positions, the guidance and nurses and health providers, we did not touch. We've seen such a tremendous increase in social emotional concerns of our students that we had that discussion heavily on Tuesday when we were going through this process. And we just can't. Two of the hires we've made in the past 5 years is actually a school adjustment counselor. And those have been two of the best hires we've made, just because of their impact on our students and their health and their well-being. So,
That's great, thank you, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a key focus on today's youth, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, on that point, like Kathy and I attended a meeting the other day, and Jim was there too, and the guidance, some of the guidance staff was there, along with the adjustment counselor, to really fill us in on what's going on in the schools and the mental health department. And we've had an increase in hospitalizations.
Over 20 this year at the high
Over
school
20 this
alone.
year so far. It's moving down to the lower levels in a way that we haven't seen before. And it's something that everybody is really very concerned about. And if anything, we need to be adding to that staff. Mr. Lind? I'm
Just to
sorry.
clarify, that's not just here in Ashland.
Right.
Yeah.
No, again,
Oh,
most-
yeah,
I don't want people
these
to
are not
feel like
phenomena
No, no,
that's
no.
existing,
something's going
right?
on. This is
Right.
around the country.
Right.
Yeah.
The emphasis on mental health and concerns for
Yeah.
our
And out of
youngsters.
district. and
Right, but
all of
certainly
that.
removing any of those supports at this point,
Right.
I think would further add to what looks to me like a crisis.
Well, that's right. And the other piece of that is if you remove those supports, the problem doesn't go away. It just goes back into the classroom. And you're asking our classroom teachers.
It actually it could
Right.
become very costly because students are then even
They
hospitalized.
may have to
and-
leave the
Right.
district. Right, you could have all these other things. But I'm just
Absolutely.
saying, you know, the day-to-day functioning of a school requires that you have those support people there supporting our teachers, so teachers can teach,
Right.
hopefully,
Right.
you know. so-
Right, but those are good questions, and people have asked them, and for instance, a few years back when we had to make some cuts, we didn't have a school adjustment counselor for a while. And so a lot of, and a school adjustment counselor is the person that's trained to deal with some of these heavy-duty mental health issues. So, because we didn't have one, a lot of those students were being redirected to guidance where that's not their training. So it's really important to distinguish, you know, between the different roles and how they manage some of the, and it also is indicative that our kids are struggling, you know, and that is one of our goals as a school committee and as a district. One of Jim's goals is to really take a look at the well-being, which means more than just, you know, how high their SATs are and how high their grades are, but it's their overall health, and we're trying to incorporate some strategies, but first we're trying to really understand what's going on. And there is a group of people that are spending some extra time trying to look into that. And it does tie in with some of the work that I know the coalition is doing. Kids self-medicating and all that other stuff, so it's a good question, thank you.
Did you have something?
It's fine.
Anybody else?
Yes, I think it's important in our most dire situation here, just to discuss a little bit about, looking at our athletics program, because, we discuss what our goals are, but also that, we want to be a well-rounded district and have a comprehensive program. And we have a lot of sports that, and the high school kids, take part in, and that would cause some pain in our community as well. And it's, especially freshman sports, where it's some kids' first opportunity to be involved in a sport. And I don't know, Mr. Adams, maybe you could talk a little bit more. I mean, that's, where you've come from, and,
Well, again, people have heard me speak over and over. I believe we've moved away, and to no fault of anyone, really, we've moved away from being a comprehensive high school, right? I mean, at that level, I've said we're a very core-driven school, and we do well with that. But is that what our community desires? And the answer is no. It's very clear that the community desires, to me, that we want a comprehensive education. That means the arts, the music, the drama, the athletics, the clubs, and the activities. Now, those all come at a cost, and we know that. And we already charge our students exorbitant amounts of money to participate in athletics. And it's one of those things where to build self-esteem, to feel good about oneself, to participate on a team or to participate in a club, to be part of the musical, right? Those are really important pieces of the development of a child. And by pulling those away, it's impacting the entire child. And our goal isn't just to teach them math, science, English, and
There's some kids that only come
science.
to school for the drama.
They're there,
Yeah.
right? They're in school.
Yeah.
Because that's what drives them. And eventually, because of that, hopefully it drives them in a different direction after, right? If they're getting the proper instruction, whether it's in a musical or in athletics, and they're getting good role modeling, you're hoping that then transcends into their academics. And by removing those things, it will have, again, culture and climate, it'll have a tremendous impact.
well,
Yeah,
we talked about,
yeah.
so.
It's
go
okay,
ahead.
don't worry.
Go ahead, Mr. Manzi.
I can definitely vouch for exactly what you're saying. Like going into theater in high school has definitely changed my life. Like I'm going to college to become a musical theater professor. So it's definitely things that impact our lives.
Mhm. And we've talked about the impact that some of those coaches or drama teachers have had on children because they're in a different environment, and it's one more place for someone to have contact with a child and help them. So,
I mean, the day doesn't end, right? I mean, kids are coming home right now from 8 o'clock, having been with coaches for 2.5, 3 hours. It's really just an extension of the day. It's just an extension of the classroom. And some of those coaches have been at the building at 6 in the morning until 8 at night with those kids. And it's a critical component to it, that's all.
Thank you. That was important. It's a big item on that dire situation.
Okay.
I would suggest then, Madam Chair, that we move number 3 up above, so we can get
Yes.
the school start time committee
Thank you for
underway,
your
so they don't have
So they
to.
can-
Yeah, okay. So we would like to hear about the survey results from the school start time committee.
Yeah, okay.
Our school start time committee has, I think, 15 members. 3 of us are here, or 4 actually, are here tonight. 3 of us will be speaking. And we administered a survey in January that had a great response rate. So we're very pleased about that. That's great news, and it was high, and we actually had 3 different versions, one for parents, one for staff, and one for students, adolescents, and we had relatively high response rates for all 3 versions. And Sue is going to speak next.
So picking up where Betsy left off, the majority of respondents to our survey felt that the research supported changing school start time for adolescents, though 20 to 25% weren't sure and felt that they needed more exposure to information. Now, it's important to point out that this is in response to a question about whether or not one felt that the research supported later start times for adolescents. We did not ask them specifically, do you support changing the start time? So just to make that distinction. But the fact that the majority of respondents felt that the research did support changing start times is encouraging because it tells us that people are educating themselves about the issue. And getting the information out to the community was one of the goals that the committee set for ourselves. So we do feel good about that. Obviously, we still have work to do, as we do have between 1/5 and 1/4 of respondents who felt like they still needed more information. So we will continue to work towards that end. Another result from our survey, and our first slide shows this, is that teens in the district are reporting 2 to 3 hours less sleep per night than what is recommended for their age group. High schoolers reporting getting less sleep than middle schoolers. So 61% of the Ashland High School student respondents self-reported getting between 6 and 7 hours of sleep on school nights. Now, that is significant because a lot of times we tend to treat these kids as adults. We think, we're preparing them for the real world. Adults in the real world, we don't always get all the sleep that we need, but it's important to remember that they're not adults. They are still developing, their brains are still developing. So it's important to make that distinction. So I did mention that the sleep deficit at the middle school level is slightly less. Middle schoolers were reporting between 7 and 8 hours of sleep on average, which is still 1 to 2 less than what's recommended for their age group. And now that might sound sort of encouraging, they're only getting, if you're only missing 1 hour of sleep a night, that's not so bad. But if you look at that 1 to 2 hour sleep deficit, we have to remember that that effect is cumulative. So if you look over the course of a week, that's adding up to between 5 and 10 hours of sleep that's missing, right, over the course of the week, and then it adds as weeks and weeks go on. So again, it can be very significant. It's also interesting to note that when we asked parents about how much sleep their children were getting, their perception of how much sleep their teens were getting is higher than what the kids themselves were saying. And the committee had a discussion about, what could contribute to that discrepancy. Certainly there's a difference between when you say, all right, Mom, Dad, I'm going to bed, and when when that teen actually falls asleep, whether it's because they're reading or texting or a variety of other things that they could be doing. But it was interesting to see that there was a discrepancy between what they were saying and what their parents were saying about how much sleep they were getting. Our next slide, there we go, talks about, we asked a question about how tired do you feel during the school day to the students. And high school students in particular are reporting a high degree of tiredness during the school day. So we asked them specifically, how do you feel during the first 2 periods of the day? And for both middle and high school students, we see that there is a giant percentage, about 85%, who categorize themselves as tired at the beginning of the day. Now, whether it's tired but alert or tired but struggling, right, which is a little bit more concerning when we get into that, you know, I'm struggling to stay awake, I'm struggling to focus. As the day goes on, the results for middle school students get a little bit better. They seem to perk up. They report being less tired by the end of the day. Again, we have to remember that it's a tricky age group there. We have kids just on the cusp of adolescence. If you walk into any middle school classroom, right, you can see the variety for yourself. There are kids who look like they could be fourth graders, and there are kids who look like they are men already. So we can see that discrepancy. But, you know, we do see them perking up by the end of the day, by and large. Whereas for the high school students, I mean, we do have a bit of improvement, but we still have a large percentage of kids still reporting that they're tired at the end of the day as well. We had some discussions about this as well. And I'll just add, I mean, I think as a teacher at the high school, I see these kids all day. By and large, they're good kids. The majority of kids who go to our schools are doing the things that they're supposed to do. And so when they're reporting that they're tired but alert, you know, we had a discussion about maybe tired is just, you know, sort of the new baseline, but they know what they have to do, so they're gonna push through and do the things that they have to do. But we do get a little bit more concerned when we get to, you know, I'm tired and I'm struggling to do those things that I know that I should be doing. And then the last part of the survey that I'm going to address has to do with, we had a question asking them, students and teachers and parents actually, about stress factors that would have a negative impact on students or for parents for their adolescent children. Students reported 5 areas that they had significant concern about, and those were ability to concentrate, anxiety, academic performance, ability to plan and organize, and irritability. And for parents and staff, they listed as high concern pretty much everything we had put out there. The only one that did not register as high concern at the time we gave the survey was concerns about safety while driving. Although I would imagine that if we gave the survey again, after we've now had record snowfall and we've had our teen drivers driving around snowbanks, that we might have a different response to that question as well. I'm going to turn it over to Gina. Thank you.
So, from the results of the survey, it was clear that not only do our parents and students have concerns about a later start time, but our staff have concerns as well. And some of these concerns were family schedules, childcare, athletics and district interplay, extracurricular activities, that it'll just be a shift in their schedule, additional costs to the districts, and the 2 highest concerns were technology use and amount of homework. While we didn't explicitly ask our respondents if they were in favor of later school start times, comments showed that more were in favor of a change than those who were not. And the reason we didn't ask outright if anyone was pro or con is that we don't have any concrete proposals at this time to what a change would look like. Additionally, parents and staff would like other issues and distractions that have an effect on stress levels and the amount of sleep that our students are getting. And we agree that there are other concerns that may affect sleep and stress in our children. However, the research and movements by other districts has shown, moving to a later school start time for adolescents has had a measurable and positive impact.
In closing, I'd like to first make a point that our committee feels that there's enough scientific evidence to support the value of continuing to pursue this. And also the survey combined with the experience of the staff comments indicate that students in Ashland are sleep deprived and stressed. So our next step is, as Gina mentioned, we didn't ask whether people were in favor or not because we don't have proposals, so that's one of our next steps. The whole committee is gonna, a homework assignment of each of us will come up with a scenario of how it could look. And once we have those initial drafts, then we will solicit some input from staff and students and parents to move forward from there. And things we will be doing in addition, presenting those initial drafts, which will be initial drafts, they're just gonna be samples. We'll continue to provide opportunities for people to educate themselves, and we will be engaging the different groups of stakeholders, and we're gonna be looking at more closely at what other school districts who have successfully implemented a change, how they've done it and how they're continuing to see success. And I think that's about it for our presentation.
Any questions?
Do questions?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, thanks, everybody. This is great. I love this. But first one is the proposals, and maybe this is too early, so maybe it's more of a comment. But I'm wondering if you think you'll have sort of a set of ground rules for the proposals, sort of, in other words, principles that, it needs to be, and I don't know what the principles would be, but for an example might be it needs to either be cost neutral or it needs to be within a certain parameter. Do you expect that you will come up with that prior to the proposals? Is that
That's not
fair
the
to say?
challenge I gave them
No?
initially.
Oh.
We
What's
did.
the challenge?
Oh, so they've already, this has
Yeah,
already
so our
gone
last
out.
meeting. So,
Never mind,
but
okay.
there are some specific things that you have to look at. We have contract language
Mm-hmm.
that specifically states when something can begin. So school cannot start after 9 a.m. in Ashland, right? So we know that. So we have to look at those boundaries. That doesn't mean we can't open up negotiations and have conversation. It's just saying right now, that's one of the parameters.
Okay.
The second one is, we know typically, based on our bus runs, the timing difference between one school to the next and how that fluctuates throughout the morning.
Okay.
So those are things that are known quantities.
That's kind of what I was
So
going for.
our-
You're taking that kind of.
Yeah, so our next meeting, we're coming back actually with a lot of this data
Yeah.
to start, infiltrating it into the proposals. And it's interesting because I think we'll see a lot of different proposals. And I think, what Betsy was talking about here, we gotta be very clear. These are just initial discussions,
Yeah.
right? There's not one proposal that we're sending out there and saying, this is it. Because I know mine looks significantly different than a couple that I've seen, which is neat.
Yeah,
It-
right, no,
It's a starting point.
It's
and
bringing in a lot of
that
ideas.
brings back into that conversation about cost neutral, right? Trying to figure out what that looks like. We don't know how many bus runs we would have to add should we choose a different schedule. We don't know what the traffic pattern, well, we know the traffic pattern downtown Ashland is not good. So those are concerns.
Sure.
The drop off at Warren, what does that look like at 8:40 versus 8:25? Well, I know on Friday, 8:25, it's as smooth as can be, right, Mr. Kyra? There's never an issue, because I'm always there, right?
Come tomorrow.
I have a meeting in the morning at 7:30,
that's
so
right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sure.
But those are the types of things we'll be looking at.
So that's interesting, and that
Yeah.
actually leads me to, are you making an assumption that when you move one time, is there a possibility that you'll be switching school times?
Again,
Is everything on the
That could be
table?
a, that could be a
has to be on the
proposal.
table.
right?
That's what I wanted to know, okay.
but again, I think it's
But-
critical that the conversation we've had as a group is to say, I don't want the Warren parents and the Mendez parents getting up in arms if they're watching this.
No.
That's not
Not
what we're looking at
doing. No, no.
doing. I think the charge that I've given everyone is to have the greatest amount of impact with the least amount of impact,
That's a
We
good
talk
way of,
about that at every
Yeah.
meeting.
every meeting.
sure,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
The
We're
other,
not just focused on what's best for the high school students. I've started my homework and taking into consideration what I hear. I don't have students at Warren anymore, but I hear about
sure,
Right.
yeah.
drop-off.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, do you anticipate this committee, and maybe I missed it and you already are doing this, but it strikes me that this will always work best if we do it not alone, but we do it with,
Other communities.
Is that something you foresee
There are other
What, would that be
communities
parents?
investigating.
No,
Dover
I mean
Sherborne.
more like your committee
In the
reaching out.
TBL, like in the.
Reaching out and using, you've done such an awesome job here, and it will be better for us if we go this way, if others follow. So I guess I'm wondering if there's a possibility of reaching out and,
I wouldn't rule that out.
Okay.
That's not something we're formally doing, but certain members of the committee have been tasked with collecting information from other districts. And I wouldn't be shocked if that led to some more formal collaboration in the future.
awesome. Thank you for all the work you're
Yeah,
all doing.
yeah,
Really
great
good.
work.
Thank you, ladies.
I was curious, could I just ask, just kind of, when you asked the survey questions of the students how much sleep they were getting, and then you asked the parents how much sleep they think their children were getting, so how specific was that question? Do you think the students are just like, oh, I get 6 hours? Do you think it was do you think they really calculated how much sleep they got, or, I don't know, I'm just wondering. Or you think they just guessed, or, there's no way to know, right?
Yeah, there's no way to know.
I remember.
I'm thinking, would the parents be a little more, do you think the parents were more accurate than the student, and the student's just
No.
kind of like,
I could definitely say, I think my mom thinks I get more sleep than I do.
and you don't?
Yeah.
You really
mom
don't?
lied.
In your room is your.
Your mom says,
I
"I
don't
know
know
you
the results at all. I mean,
Yeah,
I
have no
know
idea
Just
how much
wondering.
my kids.
My
I
kids
know
would
when
go
they
to
come
bed
around.
and I would go back and I'm like, why is your light still on?
Yeah.
So that result seems perfect. to me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have 2 teenagers, and I am sure, I think one of them gets less sleep than she actually gets, and the other one gets far more sleep than he actually gets. So I don't think the difference is because parents are older and more analytical,
Yeah, just curious.
but I don't know. There's no way to.
Yeah.
And then another,
We're specific about that question
Yeah.
to narrow it to school night after sleep.
yeah, not a Saturday.
When you put them to bed at 9, Kathy, they're not sleeping.
When I tuck them in and they kiss them goodnight, they're not. Oh. So, anyway. And then at one point in this district, we did, the high school and the middle school were combined bus. So I'm sure that comes into somebody's proposal, or, but I think we separated them because of cost and. but
They were at the same building, that's
Right.
why.
Yeah.
They were at the same.
No, they weren't. Never mind. Yeah, go ahead. Or maybe they were, is that why? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's, well,
Yeah, they were.
How long
all-
ago
Before
was
the new
that,
high school.
Kathy?
Before this was
Well-
built, before that was built.
yeah, maybe that is why.
We're
Okay,
gonna
never
look at
mind.
all sorts of.
Yeah.
options
I was
and
just
be
throwing it out there.
As thorough as possible and engaging with the community as possible.
Excellent. Yes,
Yeah,
thank
it's a
you
lot
very
of
much.
work,
It's
and I
great.
appreciate it. I think it's good.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
everybody,
Awesome.
for all
Very
your.
thorough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now go get some sleep.
Yeah, now go to sleep.
Thank you to the administrators for
Yes.
coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, very much.
All right. Back to policy.
Mr. Rand?
Yes, your turn.
All right, so in keeping with our continuing review of the new policy manual,
Yes.
I have just a few from section C, none from section D, and then 3 from section E.
Okay.
So I'll just walk you through them. I think they're relatively easy changes. So file CDB, which is the Central Office Administrative Search Process, talks about how to establish a committee when there's an open position for Assistant Superintendent, Director of Finance, Director of Technology, and the Director of Curriculum. And we're just looking to add the Director of Nutrition Services. That was inadvertently left off.
You
I have a
motion?
question, I have a
Oh,
question
sure,
on that,
Kathy.
sorry.
Yeah.
Just reading through the policy, I'm like, oh. So, in the group that you pulled together, in the second paragraph, it says, a parent from the school's advisory council. Are those the
What-
site councils?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
site council?
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Yep.
Okay.
I just,
That's
thank
all.
you.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right.
I'm fine
We
with
have a motion to amend this policy as indicated to add Director of Nutrition Services.
it. So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next.
The next one is policy ECAC, which speaks to vandalism. And the very last, well, second to last paragraph read, parents and students will be made aware of legal implications involved. And someone questioned that we're making an automatic assumption there that it's a student who caused the vandalism. So
yeah.
the revision would be when a student has been involved in vandalism of school property, the parents and students will be made aware. Because vandalism could be caused by someone other than a student.
Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. Do we have a motion for that amendment?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. The next one is policy EEAA, which is walkers and riders. This gets a little bit more complicated because there's two pieces to this. It talks about reimbursement from the state for our riders, and then who we actually provide bus transportation to. So it's two separate things, and I think I had a number of people respond to this saying they were confused. Is it 1.5 miles or 2 miles? So the reimbursement to a school system for transportation is given by the Commonwealth only for students living at least 1.5 miles from school. So at the end of the year, when my office does the end-of-year report and we submit it to DESE, one of the sections is how many students we transport 1.5 miles to school. Because they are supposed to be reimbursing districts for students who live further than that. I have never in my lifetime actually seen any reimbursement come our way.
And why is that? Because there's no money?
There's no funding.
Don't fund it.
But it still is a provision of the law that says if there is funding,
Oh, okay.
Why is that in a policy, though? I mean, I'd presume this is an MASC policy that we just adopted from them, but since when do we need to quote the law in policy? And what does that do, Rich?
Well, because there are many districts that choose a different standard from the law. So it might be they might transport anybody more than a mile away.
I understand, but,
So-
and
That's the
that,
next
that
section.
isn't the issue, though. I'm talking about why do we put in about the reimbursement? Like, what is the point of
Why is
that
that in there?
to our readers? What do they need, why do they need to know that? I mean, it's interesting, but why are they looking in our policy manual to find out? I just think it's confusing and.
well, we can
I don't know
eliminate
what
that
it-
whole
The whole area.
sentence.
Has anybody helped me with that? Like, why do we?
Well, it seemed to be when we were going through the policy manual, it must be their practice to take all of the laws and put them into policy. I think that's what we saw. That's why it's way bigger than ours ever was. I think they're just doing that as a rule, whether or not we need
Well,
every
I
single
don't
one
have
of
a
them.
problem with, like, the first sentence.
Right.
Right? The first sentence says that. We'll do it in applicable, but then we don't go into the law, because if they can look up the law, only because when you start down that road, it gets
We're
confusing.
interpreting,
We're-
rather than
it just-
saying, there's a law. Well, we intend to follow the law on this issue, rather than offering an
Parents don't
interpretation.
care about, they want to know, I can see why a policy would talk about who's our walkers and who's our riders, and I think that's appropriate that we would have a policy. But how we get reimbursed according to Mass General Law is not something that's, I don't know, that's my feeling. I don't think there's any.
Doesn't belong in policy.
Well, you can certainly strike that whole sentence starting with reimbursement to the school system.
That's what I would suggest. That's my feeling.
Are you making a motion for
I
that?
would make that motion, but we need to actually, why don't we finish with the policy?
Okay.
Right.
It's not a motion.
And then additionally, the committee will provide transportation. So this is the section that says who we are going to provide transportation for. And in grades K through 6, we provide transportation for students living more than 2 miles from school. And annually, the committee may set a bus transportation fee to provide transportation for students in grades K through 6 who live less than 2 miles from school, and for all students in grades 7 to 12.
This is where I would say, this doesn't, again, the committee will provide, and maybe it's transportation at no charge, or, and then like you, we provide transportation to all of those people. Some of them, because of state law, there is no charge. Some we act for a fee we provide, isn't that right?
Right, so the committee will provide transportation for grades K through 6 living more than 2 miles. That's what that first section says.
Right?
At no cost.
I understand. We'll provide at
And
no
then the
cost.
committee may set a bus transportation fee to provide transportation for students in grades K through 6 who live less than 2 miles.
I mean, I think, given that, I understand where this is a one-size-fits-all that MCAS, or MSC has written, but reality is that's what we do. We provide transportation to all of these people. For these people, it is at no charge, because for these people, it isn't may set a transportation fee, we have. Right, or we?
But you may vote next year not
You could
to.
reduce it.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can say no transportation fee.
Next year, you may vote not to.
Yeah.
This policy gives us the option to do so, but doesn't require it.
Right, I guess in my mind, that would be when you change the policy, because right now, this is what we do, but I suppose you're just looking at it as a budget thing that we do, I look at it almost more as a policy, but that's fine. I just think I think it's a little confusing, the way we are doing this, but. Because, again, in exceptions to these guidelines at the discretion of the superintendent, don't we do exceptions based on need? Or we provide, or does the superintendent, what discretion does the superintendent have around this?
You said-
Well, for instance, if there was a student who lived within the 2-mile range,
Mm-hmm.
but they were in some kind of an accident and needed transportation from we've provided transportation from someone's house when they've been
Temporary.
injured or temporarily, or we had a couple of families displaced by fire
Yeah.
over the last couple of years, and, they were living temporarily somewhere else, and we provided transportation for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that just gives the superintendent some discretion for
Discretion to
individual
vote, to
cases.
Provide, yeah, okay, well, I
There
can see where
is,
that is.
as part of the bus fee, there is a waiver application that's
There's a
tied to
waiver.
free and reduced lunch.
Which, I also think that ought to be noted in this policy. If we're gonna make a policy around this, is that, I mean, I guess I would propose that we would make that part of our policy as well, because we're not required to, are we?
I believe you are required by law if you have a bus fee.
Do we waive it, or how do we do that, though? I thought it was something that we just, do we waive fees completely, or it's based on a sliding thing?
It's based on the free and reduced scale.
I thought that was something that, not that maybe we have to do it, but that there was some just level of discretion. No.
No.
It's always, you just have to, every time we set any fee?
It specifically talks about bus fee.
It's just
We
bus-
do also apply it to athletics, but I don't think that's required by law.
That was, okay.
Yeah, but this one is required by law.
So Marcia, but go back, so the first comment you had, though, the reimbursement, you're thinking that
Strike.
maybe that doesn't need to be there, right? Because that does kind of confuse.
Yeah,
That doesn't really.
like this policy. I think it's
I can
poorly
tell.
done, yeah. But
So
that
I'm
would go a long way.
Do you want to table this, so that we can look?
Well, I'm a
at,
little
or-
confused over Marcia's question, so I'm thinking, should I read? Trying to read it.
Suggest we table and
More.
bring this one back.
But do we all think that reimbursement part maybe doesn't need to be in there? Or,
That's what you need to decide.
Right, I mean,
but do you think it's necessary, or, well,
was this a comment, it helps me to know where the changes are coming from. Is this you, or is it a comment coming in from the public, or is it MASC recommending that we make the change? How did this get here? Because maybe it's one of those deals too, where Mike was working with us, where he said there are some things that are policy and other things that belong maybe in a handbook, or that are more procedurally oriented. So is this one of those scenarios? No.
We're revisiting this because when we put the manual out for community review,
right?
Right.
You
I
had
did
to-
have probably 2 or 3 people come back and say,
Okay.
This says 1.5, but I thought we transported over 2,
Person who read the.
you know?
Yes, I think, yeah, I saw that.
One and
Right,
two.
Yeah.
so there
Um,
were a couple
So I
of
was
questions
confused.
from
So-
people in the
Wanting
community.
clarification. And
Yeah,
your
I
comment
can
is just whether
see-
it belongs in policy or not.
I can see why someone would want clarification of this, and I would too.
So what else, Mark? So I'm just trying to figure it. So the reimbursement kind of confuses it. Is that what you're thinking?
I think it's a confused policy. I agree, I would like to table it.
Let's
All right.
table
I mean,
So we
it.
table it and we'll think some more about it.
Right.
Sounds
Back
good.
away completely, but
No,
I
no, no,
don't
no,
think
let's-
it's a
Fair
good
enough.
policy.
All right.
Yeah,
So I'd like
if
to
that's the
revisit
case,
it.
then I think we should table it and then
Okay.
have the subcommittee if there still is one, or somebody, you know,
You and me.
pick another,
I would be happy to revisit it.
that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that one we're gonna table. Okay, then the last one is the
last one's
regulations
easy.
for EEAEC, which is bus rules and conduct. And the only change to this is the beginning of this policy spoke to students, and then somewhere in the middle, it switched over to pupils, so we just made it students throughout, so that it would be consistent.
All right.
Works for me.
Works for me.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Okay.
All right, we're coming down to the very final stretch here. Okay. Action items and future agenda items. We've talked already tonight about school start times. It looks like
We're gonna keep it on there because
Yeah, for
we'll
the
have
spring.
periodic updates through.
you'll come back, and somebody
Someone
from
will.
your committee will come back and let us know how that next phase is going. MCAS, it is winter, and I know we're right in the middle of budget, so it's hard to think of another big project, but at some point, we said we would take a look at that, and
Looking at the dart.
right. Same thing with the team building. The policy revision is what we're doing. It's ongoing. Jim, in March, at the end, after all this is done, we'll do your mid-year. We are moving the budget vote to March 12th.
Correct.
Entry plan report, Jim.
Yeah,
where
sure.
You're doing that on the 12th, are you?
On the 12th as well.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the multi-use path, Joel Open Space Committee, that's for the spring. And then we have a Leadership Academy presentation, Marcia suggestion. We're hoping that that happens in the spring. Anything else that anybody wants to add to this, or any comments?
I would just recommend that we consider another budget workshop date before the 12th.
Yeah, I think we should.
Just with the school committee and Barbara and myself.
Are folks better at night, or during the day, or on a
I'd rather do it at night
Yeah.
myself.
at night? Okay, so if we can find an
But
evening.
then again, you know that I have,
Make sure you put it on your calendar. Big smiley face.
when are we meeting again with this, when is our next tri
It
board?
is
March
Thursday night,
5th.
March 5th.
6:30
And when are you away, Marcia? Are you away before that or after that?
after March.
So you would have an opportunity some evening before that for us to all get together and, yeah, okay.
That's not, so we're gonna try to before the tri.
I would like that. I
Same.
think that's a good
What if
idea.
we, I think, wasn't March 3rd good, but I think FinCom.
It didn't work for FinCom, right,
Right.
FinCom.
Does
Does
that work for us? March 3rd?
Tuesday, March 3rd.
Does that work for you guys?
That's the hip
Okay.
dish.
That's the hypnotist.
Let's
hypnotize the tri-board. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
That was funny.
Yeah, well, we'll have to miss it. You'll have to tell us about it, though.
Yeah. You probably can hypnotize us from afar.
So we'll plan on Tuesday, March 3rd. I just want to get it posted, just to
Yes.
start with.
Tuesday,
think so.
March 3rd, 7? Are we doing an evening?
Does that
Or
work
do
for
you wanna go
everybody, or even earlier?
I
So,
can, I can go
6:30?
earlier.
I can do
Yeah.
earlier.
I can go as early as 5.
want to
if
do
you
5, and then you guys can get home and get out of here? Let's do 5.
Whatever you want.
If 5 works.
Actually, and is it really, is it about me? Because I could even do earlier. I could do 4 or 3. I can get out, and
Well, it's more about letting them get
Right.
home, so if, I can
Yeah.
do it whenever.
I just don't want to do first
What's
thing.
the
in the morning.
earliest
Exactly.
that anybody can do?
I'm
I can do
earliest.
3.
You want to do 3?
I
On
can do 3.
March 3rd?
before
Does that work for you?
Okay.
Okay.
Barbara, but that was.
Well, let's minimize the
All right,
evening
so-
zone.
I would
Save,
prefer that
conserve our
myself.
energy.
And then you can come to the hypnotist show.
Then I can go to the hypnotist. Great. We can all have dinner. Nice job.
3 o'clock, I gotta write this.
Good.
And,
And that was it.
uh, anybody have any updates they want to go through real quickly?
Just, we've got liaison tomorrow,
Yeah,
7:30.
yeah.
I'm sure the ongoing discussion about.
Kathy, did you want to update, because you and I attended the FinCom meeting with Jim.
Yep,
Did you
and
want to
then we
say
went-
something briefly about that?
Just that.
Just that we were there.
We went Tuesday night after having our workshop in the morning with the admins in the morning.
Right.
9 to, almost 1, I think it was over 3 hours.
Was.
That was a budget workshop with the admins, and then Lori and I went and supported Barbara and Jim at the FinCom meeting.
tried
And they
to be
presented,
supportive.
you were,
I know, we didn't
and
want any
Gina did
quorum
come, but we
issues.
didn't want to have quorum because we wanted to be able to,
I was there in spirit.
she was there in spirit.
Thank you for your commitment.
Yeah, and they.
You have a
they
quorum at somebody
sent in-
else's meeting, you just can't deliberate.
Right,
Yeah,
but we
we're
did
afraid of-
participate.
Yeah, that we would be both talking or.
Didn't
Yeah,
want
They
to,
have, their meeting's
We
posted.
erred on the
and
side of
you're-
caution.
we weren't posted.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah. There wasn't just, you know, because we had an issue with
Wanna
that
be careful.
before, and the advice was if
We
you're
were
gonna
being
really
cautious.
just go and sit and listen.
Yeah.
And not participate in the meeting on any level, then we can all go, all be there. But once a participation starts and it involves something that's under our purview, which is budget, then, the third person,
But they presented, well, the budget, where we are on the FY15 budget, and, but we did talk about the FY16. You presented, talked about some numbers, so. I think that's it, and then the we had we all went to the tri-board meeting, right? And then, we have liaison tomorrow, so we'll be continuing talking there. Nothing will be decided, but there'll be lots of conversation.
Oh, I'm half asleep, I think. I'm sorry.
Aren't we all?
I went to the high school the other day, I think it was yesterday, and Betsy was doing a stand. She has a poster with some statistics on it and doing a contest. There was actually a misprint on the poster, so she was really giving out goodies for kids. It had kids thinking about, you know, what could possibly not be correct on the poster. So it was a good exercise. And then I also attended a talk given by Liz Burns, who's a neurologist, on understanding the adolescent brain, and that was really quite interesting, so.
Yep, nothing new. I added earlier in the meeting that Kathy and I, and Jim was there too, went to an APC meeting with the conversation about the mental health, which is, and they're continuing that conversation, which is great. Went to the FinCom meeting, went to the tri-board meeting, liaison tomorrow. I mean, we've been asked some questions by the Finance Committee that we're prepared to discuss tomorrow. And you know, the one thing, Jim, and I don't know if now's the time or maybe some other time, but just, we are talking so much about these scenarios, and just for the benefit of the public, like, what happens between now and March 12th?
Yeah.
Well, again, I
Yeah.
think, as you just saw, we've booked another budget workshop.
Right.
We'll continue to have conversations and what we want is, we want the community to have input and provide that input to us. And again, as I said, through the chair, start with those questions, and we can get those hopefully answered. But I think it's critical to know that it's an ongoing process over the next month. That we'll be evaluating every scenario, and by March 12th, we have to come up with a number that the city feels comfortable voting as the budget. So, that's really it. I mean, it's sort of, you know, we'll have meetings with, tri-board meeting with FinCom selectmen again, and we have it's just a process.
Thank you. Yeah, I know there's some people probably saying, okay, I heard the scenarios,
Not
now
done.
what?
Yeah.
So,
There'll be more.
yeah. Anybody else? Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.